Right now, you probably have the entire spiritual and scientific heritage of humanity sitting right there in your pocket.
Oh, absolutely. On your phone.
Right. I mean, you can pull out your phone and read the Tao Te Ching, scan the Gospels, and then, skim an article on quantum physics all in the exact same afternoon.
It's incredible access.
It is. Yet, despite having more access to ultimate truths than, well, any generation in history, most of us feel more fragmented than ever. Like, we know more, but we belong nowhere.
Yeah, that is really the defining paradox of our age. We have all these profound puzzle pieces scattered on the table: indigenous wisdom, modern science, ancient theology.
But no box cover.
Exactly. We are completely missing the picture on the box to show us how they actually fit together.
Which is why we are doing a deep dive today into a really fascinating manuscript by Jon Rasmussen. It's titled Common Threads: A Search for Universal Truths.
And the mission here is definitely ambitious.
Oh, very. We are going to map out the hidden underlying structure of ultimate reality. Because Rasmussen is attempting to connect indigenous shamanism, Eastern philosophy, quantum physics, and Catholic mysticism.
But importantly, without watering any of them down into some, generic spiritual soup.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can talk about how human beings transform or heal, we have to establish the playing field. Like, what kind of universe are we actually living in?
Which is a crucial starting point.
Yeah, because if reality is just cold, dead space, your approach to spirituality is going to look very different than if it's, well, something else.
For sure. So Rasmussen starts by pointing to this universal intuition across human history, something he calls the absolute.
Right.
When you look at cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years, they all describe a foundational reality that doesn't just, come and go.
Like the Tao and Eastern philosophy.
Exactly. Or in Hinduism, it's Brahman. In Jewish mysticism, you have Ein Sof, which literally translates to the endless or the limitless source.
Or the burning bush telling Moses, I am that I am.
Right. They are all pointing at a reality that isn't just some physical object floating inside the universe, but the very source of existence itself.
But he doesn't just leave it at ancient mysticism, which I love. He pulls modern science into the mix. Specifically, he references physicist Nassim Haramein's concept of vacuum fluctuations.
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting.
Break this down for us, because traditional physics often treats the vacuum of space as empty, right? Like a void.
Right, just dead space. But Haramein argues it's actually a high-density energy field. He talks about space being packed with Planck's spherical units.
Okay, wait. Planck's spherical units sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. What are those?
I know, it really does. Think of Planck's spherical units as like the absolute smallest possible pixels of reality. You literally can't zoom in any further.
Okay, the bottom floor of the universe.
Exactly. And what Haramein is suggesting is that these tiny pixels aren't empty. They're actually microscopic hard drives. They are storing and processing the information of the entire universe.
Oh, wow. So the vacuum of space isn't empty nothingness at all.
No, it is saturated with high-density information. It's a field of intelligence at the quantum level.
Which is structurally very similar to what ancient mystics called God consciousness.
Precisely. And that fundamentally changes the paradigm. It shifts us from a dead machine universe into what Rasmussen calls the living cosmos.
Yeah, he brings up Edward Lorenz's butterfly effect here. The idea that a tiny change in a system, like a butterfly flapping its wings, changes the air pressure just enough to eventually cause a tornado halfway across the world.
Everything is connected.
Right. And then he points to the hunter's monkey effect, which is this famous observation where Japanese macaques across distant, isolated islands suddenly all started washing their sweet potatoes at the exact same time.
Once a critical mass on one island learned the behavior, yeah.
But mechanically, how is that information actually transmitting across the ocean? They didn't text each other.
Right. It implies a shared morphic field, a web of consciousness. If space isn't empty, but instead packed with those tiny memory drives we just talked about, then information doesn't always have to travel physically from point A to point B.
It just updates the cloud.
Basically, yeah. It updates the entire field simultaneously. The fabric of reality is entirely relational. Every single being is what it is because of its relation to everything else.
So the universe is less like a giant clockwork machine made of isolated dead parts, and much more like a single living, breathing organism where a twitch in the toe is instantly felt in the brain.
That's a great way to put it.
But I have a problem with this. Let me push back a bit.
Sure.
If this absolute, this quantum vacuum of infinite energy is just a massive cosmic hard drive, isn't it entirely impersonal? Like, it just sounds like we're talking about a giant cosmic battery.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the text highlights the Christian proclamation, which specifically flips that exact assumption.
How so?
Well, the absolute isn't just infinite solitude or a cold, impersonal energy source. It is, at its absolute core, communion and relationship. That is the structural meaning of the Trinity.
The infinite actually gives itself to the other.
Yes, it is self-giving love. And love, in this framework, isn't just a nice chemical emotion you feel in your brain. It is the fundamental physics of the cosmos.
Okay, but if the very fabric of the universe is made of this self-giving love, we have a massive contradiction on our hands.
Because of the human experience.
Exactly. Why is the actual human experience so riddled with anxiety, isolation, and, this constant feeling of not belonging?
Right. And to answer that, Rasmussen shifts the lens away from the vast cosmos and points it directly at the inner architecture of the human mind.
We go from the macro to the micro.
Exactly. Almost every spiritual path recognizes a structural division within us. You have the false center, which we usually call the ego, versus the divine depth.
And drawing on his decades as a practicing Cuero shaman in the Andes, Rasmussen notes that the shamans call this true, timeless self the animo.
The animo, yes. It's the part of you that exists beyond linear space and time. But to access that animo, the ego-driven illusion has to undergo a profound death.
And this is where he compares the shamanic death and rebirth rites with the Catholic sacrament of confirmation.
It's a brilliant comparison.
But mechanically, how do these rites actually function? Because he describes them both as a necessary severing.
Well, in the shamanic tradition, these rites are usually performed right after puberty. The individual is taken through a process designed to symbolically kill their childhood identity.
Okay, but why?
The goal is to detach the person from their biological ancestral wounds, like the generational trauma and the inherited fears of their family, so they can be reborn directly as a child of the earth and the divine.
Wow. And the text draws a fascinating parallel to Catholic confirmation, which also traditionally happens post-puberty.
Exactly. It is structurally designed to root the individual deeply in their identity as a child of God, cutting that ultimate reliance on the human family structure.
Both traditions seem to agree that moving from the inherited self to the true self hurts. Like, it really requires shedding a skin.
Absolutely. The Christian mystics famously call this the dark night of the soul, while the shamanic traditions refer to it as a limbo.
Ground this for us a bit, because dark night of the soul sounds very poetic. But what does that actually look like for someone living in a modern city?
It looks like a spiritual or psychological emergency. Honestly, it happens when all your old coping mechanisms just abruptly stop working.
Like a midlife crisis?
Kind of. Maybe you lose a career you built your entire identity around. Or a major relationship collapses, or you just wake up one day and realize chasing money hasn't made you happy.
So your old self is dissolving.
Yeah, the ego is dissolving, and you haven't yet stabilized in the new true self. You are in free fall.
Let me pause you there, though.
Yeah?
Because whenever I hear spiritual traditions talk about killing the ego or the ego dissolving, red flags go up for me.
That's fair.
I mean, if I completely destroy my ego, how do I set boundaries? How do I pay my rent or hold down a job? It sounds completely impractical for anyone who doesn't live in a monastery.
This raises an important question, and it's a critical distinction to make. The text clarifies that the ego is not inherently evil.
It's not.
Not at all. It is absolutely necessary for daily function and psychological development. The problem arises solely when the ego becomes the center of your identity.
Ah, I see.
Think of the ego like the basic operating system on your computer. It's designed to run background tasks, keep your calendar, and manage basic functions so you don't, step into traffic.
But we have mistakenly given that basic operating system the nuclear launch codes for our entire self-worth.
That is exactly it. Transformation isn't about smashing the computer and destroying the operating system. It's just about taking the launch codes back and handing them to the animo, the true self.
I love that analogy. So if the ego is the operating system, trauma is essentially malware that hijacks the system.
Oh, that's good. Yes.
It forces the computer to constantly run defense programs, draining all the battery. And the dark night of the soul is basically just a hard reboot.
Precisely. You transcend the ego's dominance, but you still include it for the daily commute.
Okay, so if this inner architecture, the operating system, the malware, the reboot, if this is a universal human pattern, how do we make sense of the very real differences between world religions?
It's a messy landscape.
Because Rasmussen's personal background is wild. I mean, he spent decades as a Cuero shaman with elders whose unwritten stories trace back 15,000 years. But that path eventually led him back to the Catholic Church.
That is a massive pivot.
It really is. It sounds contradictory until you look at how he structurally maps it. He uses what he calls the Venn diagram of revelation.
Right, because modern spirituality often falls into the trap of reductionism, claiming that all religions are saying the exact same thing, just with different words.
Spiritual soup.
Yeah. But Rasmussen argues they are absolutely not. The doctrines differ wildly. Instead, his Venn diagram compares systems at the structural level of transformation.
So the circles remain distinct.
Exactly. He is very clear the Tao is not just a generic vocabulary word for the Trinity. They overlap in their understanding of transformation, but they do not collapse into each other.
They maintain their unique borders.
Mm-hmm.
But Rasmussen makes a bold and probably controversial structural choice here. He places the Catholic Church at the dead center of this Venn diagram.
He does. And to be clear, he frames this not as a matter of cultural superiority, but as a matter of mechanics.
Right. Specifically, incarnation and embodiment. Break down his logic for why he places it right in the center.
His logic centers on how ultimate reality interacts with matter. Other traditions might experience these profound truths interiorly, like through deep meditation or a localized individual vision on a mountaintop.
Sure.
Rasmussen argues the Catholic center is fundamentally about taking those invisible, mystical realities and making them tangible, historical, and communal.
Which brings us to the Eucharist.
Yes. The ultimate expression of this, in his view, is the Eucharist. It takes the concept of the absolute giving itself and forces it into a physical, consumable meal that a massive, diverse community shares together in real time. It drags the spiritual entirely into the material.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He uses this analogy that just totally clarifies his perspective. He describes shamanism as this wide, open, ancient forest.
Which sounds beautiful.
It is. It allows for rapid, highly individualized exploration. You can run through the trees, find your own clearings, and have profound individual visions tailored exactly to your psychology.
But then he describes Catholicism differently.
Right. He describes Catholicism as the clear, stabilized path through that forest. It provides the heavy infrastructure that allows massive populations of people to walk together cohesively across centuries without getting lost in the weeds.
But a map or a path is entirely useless if you don't actually walk it, which is where Rasmussen shifts to the practical application of all these lofty concepts.
Yes, the actual practice.
And he warns heavily against the modern trap of false unities or spiritual consumerism.
Spiritual consumerism is like the defining feature of modern wellness culture. We take the lowest common denominator, give me the love, the light, the positive vibes, the crystal energy.
But we actively avoid the difficult mechanics of transformation.
Exactly. We skip the cross, the sacrifice, the actual uncomfortable conversion of our bad habits.
Yeah.
We want the aesthetic of enlightenment without the cost of true communion.
Spot on. And to combat that consumerism, the author emphasizes the absolute necessity of a rule of life, a structured rhythm.
Like what?
The sanctification of time through repetition. Like a daily office or morning and evening prayers. You physically train the body and the mind to repeatedly return to the center.
And central to that training is the golden rule, which structurally appears across almost all traditions.
Right.
But the specific highlight in the text is the Cuero concept of Aini, which means sacred reciprocity. It's the law of the universe that everything is an exchange of energy based on self-giving. If you take, you give.
And there's this incredible linguistic synchronicity he points out here. Aini in Kankeshua means sacred reciprocity, and Aini in Mandarin translates to love you.
Oh, wow. That is a striking parallel.
It really is. But to maintain Aini, to maintain that sacred reciprocity, you have to have discernment.
Which is hard nowadays.
Very. In a world where your social media feed is flooded with 1,000 different spiritual teachers, how do you know what is actually functional?
The text says you test a spiritual practice entirely by its fruit.
Exactly. Does the practice produce actual grounded compassion? Does it make you more capable of self-giving? Or does it just produce spiritual inflation, arrogance, and isolation?
If an intense spiritual vision just makes you feel structurally superior to your neighbors, it is not the movement of the anima.
No, it's just the ego wearing a spiritual costume.
But let me challenge the idea of a strict rule of life for a second. Doesn't a rigid daily routine where you repeat the exact same prayers or rituals every single day just become mechanical?
People worry about that a lot.
Right. Doesn't that kill the spontaneity of a genuine spiritual connection and turn it into just another chore?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Rasmussen argues the exact opposite. He points out that repetition is actually the absolute condition for depth.
How so?
Think about an elite athlete or a master jazz musician. They repeat basic drills and scales thousands of times.
Oh, I see where you're going.
They don't do it to become mechanical robots. They do it so that when they're in the middle of a chaotic game or on stage under pressure, their nervous system is completely free to improvise.
So spiritual practice functions the exact same way.
Exactly. You repeat the rule of life so that when a crisis hits or when someone deeply betrays you, your heart is already trained. It has the capacity to naturally react with love instead of just contracting into fear.
You are literally building the muscle memory of the soul. That's incredible. But what happens when that freshly built muscle memory runs headfirst into our very real, deeply entrenched human trauma?
Because it always does. No matter how much you pray or meditate, the trauma always flares up.
Always. And this is where the integration of modern psychology and ancient spirituality becomes so crucial.
Yes. The text points out that the false self, or the ego, isn't just a silly illusion we created for fun. It is a highly sophisticated protection mechanism born directly out of trauma.
Born from our deepest wounds. And in shamanism, as well as in the Christian mystical tradition, wounds aren't just ugly things to be fixed, erased, and forgotten.
No, not at all.
The Creo shamans recognize that when integrated, our specific wounds become our actual gifts. They dictate the specific medicine we're meant to bring to the world.
Rasmussen brings in philosopher Ken Wilber's concept of transcend and include here. You don't reach spiritual maturity by amputating your psychological shadows or pretending your petty human ego doesn't exist.
You transcend them, but you include them by embracing them without judgment.
Exactly. When you bring the dark shadow into the light of awareness, it stops acting like hidden malware. It loses its subconscious destructive power over your operating system.
So what does this all mean for you? It's like physical pain. Pain isn't your enemy. It's a brilliant biological alarm system.
That's a perfect analogy.
It forces your brain to pay attention to a physical wound so your body can send resources there to heal it. Our psychological shadows and our spiritual traumas function the exact same way. They are alarms drawing healing grace directly to the places we are broken. We just have to stop turning off the alarm.
And this individual healing actually points to a much larger cosmic destiny.
Where are we headed?
The text explores an incredible structural convergence between traditions regarding the ultimate future of humanity. On one hand, you have the Christian doctrine of the resurrection,
Which claims that physical matter itself will be glorified and transformed.
right. And Rasmussen brings up the Shroud of Turin here.
Wait, really? The Shroud of Turin?
Yeah, he notes how intense scientific study increasingly points to the image on the cloth being the result of an inexplicable high-energy transfer, like a literal, massive burst of informational light radiation at the exact moment the physical body was transfigured.
Explain the causality there. How does a potential burst of light on a burial cloth tie into human evolution?
It suggests that the physical body isn't just a trash bag for the soul that gets discarded at death. Instead, matter is capable of receiving such a high density of grace and information that it physically upgrades.
Wow.
And right alongside that Christian framework, you have the Quero prophecy. The elders speak of human beings eventually evolving from Homo sapiens into Homo luminous.
Literal beings of light.
Exactly. Both traditions are pointing to a future endpoint where matter and spirit are no longer divided, but fully integrated.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of Rasmussen's work. The Eucharistic cosmos.
The grand finale.
Yeah. The idea that the entire universe, from the high-density information packed into the quantum vacuum to the complex society of human beings, is built on a singular reciprocal cycle.
It receives its existence from the absolute, and its highest possible fulfillment is returning that existence in a state of thanksgiving.
To exist at all is to receive. To live fully is to give thanks.
That is the hidden structure we set out to map. The ultimate mission of Common Threads isn't to flatten all religions into a single monolith. It's to reveal that the universe is fundamentally, structurally rigged for communion.
I love that phrase. Rigged for communion.
Whether you are looking at the quantum mechanics of a subatomic particle, standing on an ancient Andean mountaintop, or kneeling at a Catholic altar, the underlying blueprint operating the system is self-giving love.
It means that the fragmentation and isolation we feel when we scroll on our phones isn't the actual truth of who we are. The true structure of reality is relational. We belong to each other, and we belong to the source.
Beautifully said.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. If Rasmussen is right, and the deepest mechanical structure of reality is reciprocal, like a constant sacred giving and receiving, like breathing, take a hard look at the biggest frustration or pain in your life right now.
The one you keep trying to avoid.
Exactly. What if that specific wound isn't an obstacle keeping you off your spiritual path? What if it is the exact doorway being held open for you right now to receive a deeper level of grace?
A profoundly transformative lens to view our struggles through.
It really is.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into these incredible sources. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the map, and stay insanely curious.